Well, welcome to Gundagai, everyone. I'm Chris Groves with my wife and son. We run a mid-sized family farming operation at Cowra in the central west of New South Wales. I'm your MC for the day, so that includes crowd control and everything else. We are here on the banks of the majestic Murrumbidgee River with some very dry-looking hills around it. And as we speak, the rain is moving south. But if you can resist the urge to look at the radar every 10 minutes, it will get here a little bit quicker, they tell me. We're here to hear results from 5 years of the Bowan Park flock. Now, as everybody realises, we've got decimated DPIs around the country now. So if research has to be done, we have to do it ourselves as producers. And that leads to some pretty good outcomes because it becomes targeted research of exactly what we need. To the people at Ridgehaven, congratulations for taking this project on. It's got a lot of benefits for the industry. To the seed stock producers, you've contributed your time and animals for this project. Your group has the potential to influence a huge percentage of the prime lamb industry, just by the position you're in. We'll hear about findings of the Bowan Park project this morning. Isabelle will speak to us soon. A couple of quick things. Any red hot questions? Speakers are prepared to take them during the presentation, but if you can possibly hold off till the end, we will have a question and answer session at the end of each presentation. And could you please put your mobile phones on silent? I'll introduce Isabele Roberts. Isabelle runs a mixed farming business in the central west of New South Wales with her siblings Ruth and Floyd and husband Pete. The core focus of the business is the prime lamb industry, researching and developing genetics at Ridgehaven Poll Dorset, verifying their genetic capacity in their own commercial lamb enterprise and working alongside other producers to improve their prime lamb production systems. Isabelle actively seeks to develop communications with all parts of the supply chain, working specifically to encourage a feedback flow from processors and meat buyers to lamb producers. Her knowledge and experience with data collection and analysis of carcass data feedback, both at a research and commercial prime lamb level, provide a valuable contribution to the processor-producer relationship conversation. And just a little side issue, Isabelle was actually awarded the Coles Weekly Times Sheep Farmer of the Year in 2023. Ladies and gentlemen, Isabele Roberts.
Thanks, Chris. So I want to start off today acknowledging the people who and the companies who have actually helped support what we've done. There's not a chance in the world that you can run a project like this unless you've got industry support, and that comes in lots of different forms. The first one that I really want to put forward is our own stud business. So at Ridgehaven, we run as a team. We run a mixed farming system, and as Chris said, primarily focus on the prime lamb industry. But our team has to be supportive of everything that we do. So about 7 years ago, when I said, we better have a look at some meat equality, and they went, why is that? And I said, well, I think the industry's probably going to need it in the next 10 years. So if we don't start looking now, we better, we might be in trouble. So we did our own little project, and then we decided that from a quality of data collection, what we needed was a standalone flock. And so when I presented to our business the idea of actually pulling together a progeny trial that we could include other stud businesses in, that we could benchmark the Poll Dorset genetics, we could go looking for other genetics that we didn't know about. Our business was incredibly supportive of that because of the vision of what they thought that the industry needed at the other end. So enormous thank you to my family, who are also our business partners too. So there's two other people, actually there's three other people that I would like to just kind of bring forward to thank. Two of them are in the room, which is great. One's Pete McGilchrist, who is here. So I rang Pete and I said, who I really didn't know at that time, and I said, so I want to run a bit of carcass testing. Do you reckon I can? And he said, oh yeah, I reckon we can sort that out. So we did. The second person is Michelle Henry, who from Gundagai Lamb, we have killed and done all of our carcass testing at Gundagai Lamb from 2020 to 24. And in 2020, in the middle of COVID lockdowns, and we could only just get into the plant, I was sitting there going, wow, we're doing all this work and it costs a whole lot of money, and is the industry ever going to get paid for intramuscular fat? Like, is this are we doing all this work and nobody's going to get any value out of it? And she said, hang on. And I went, okay, righto. And she walked back in the room and she said, you got 5 minutes? I was like, yes, I've got probably a lot more than 5 minutes if you've got an answer for me. And so Will Barton from GMP sat down with me and the UNE meat scientists for about 3 hours that afternoon, and we spoke about what the industry potentially could look like. And so I'm just saying a big thank you to Michelle for saying, hang on, let's have a chat about this. The third person that I would like to thank who's not in the room is George Carter from Linton Poll Dorset. Now this is a backwards thank you, because when I proposed this project to him, he said, oh, that sounds a bit challenging. Not sure you can do that. That's going to cost you a lot of money. And that's going to cost you a lot of time, and I'm not sure how you can handle that. And anyone who knows me knows I quite like a challenge. And so I decided we'd do it anyway. So those three people really are core to how this has come about. There's been all sorts of other support from industry. Shearwell's been fantastic. They've supplied us with all of our tags as we go along. And, you know, there's no way you can do this sort of stuff without electronic tags. So they've been great. Zoetis has helped us along the way. Neogen's been fantastic with all of the DNA testing work that we've done, and particularly Mel Dowling answers all of my crazy questions that come in whenever. University of Sydney have been part of our data collection program, looking at remote walkover way systems and figuring out whether we can actually do some remote monitoring for either animal health or animal performance. You know, potentially being able to predict what's going to happen on that. The guys at UNE Meat Science have always been able to come and do our work when we need to. Pete tells me that I'm the only person that books in the carcass date literally the day that the previous year cohorts finish, but they make it work. And finally, the MLA, who you may be aware, they set up a set of satellite resource flocks for the period of 21, 22, 23. And satellite resource flocks effectively collect data that can get submitted through to the sheep genetics analysis as a reference population. And so we have been one of those satellite flocks for those 3 year periods, and it's been incredibly valuable to be part of that from our point of view, but I think from an industry point of view, those satellite flocks have been great too. So we've got Clara here, she's going to speak a little bit to that later. So we've had fantastic support from industry, and we've been very humbled by that little crazy idea that we had has turned into something that hopefully is going to be greatly beneficial to everybody else too. So I think this morning the best thing that I can start with is just kind of framing up what we do and why we do what we've done, and that will help understand the data at the other end. So the purpose of what we've put forward in effect was to benchmark genetics, Poll Dorset genetics, and to find genetics that we didn't know about. Now that means what we do is we need to actually look for particular traits that emphasise what we need. I'm really bad at this too, by the way. That means we need to look for particular traits that emphasise what the Poll Dorset industry needs. So the research project itself sits on a 1,700 acre farm. It's a mixed farming block. We run commercial use as well as the research use on there. And so when our business made a portion of that available, we also made a portion of surplus stud ewes available for that as well. So the project itself runs with purebred Poll Dorset ewes that are surplus out of Ridgehaven. Now they're surplus for a number of different reasons. Some of those are going to be, from a genetic trait point of view, they're no longer required. Some of them may be that there's structural things that we're not interested in. Like there's a big variation inside that ewe population, but they're as consistent as you're going to find because they come from one breeding program, they're one breed, and they're very, they've got similar pedigrees sitting inside of them too. So the project itself looks for commercial traits that are relevant for the lamb industry. So while we are a stud program, we're not looking specifically at individual breed points. There is opportunity for people to come and actually visually assess those lambs from an individual sire point of view, but from a measurement point of view, we don't take any of those measurements. So what we're looking for are birth weights, growth rates, muscularity, carcass and then carcass quality. That in effect, if you're a lamb producer, are the things that are going to assist you be more effective with your production system and also more profitable at the other end. So that's all the things that we measure. The lambs do get weighed a lot, but that's okay because it means we get to see them a lot, and you get a really good idea in terms of how different sire lines are performing. So I think the spray can company, whichever one we use, Heineken, I think we keep them afloat when it comes to this because we put different coloured dots on the lambs for the different sires. So you have like a blue shoulder and a blue back and a blue rump, and that's a different sire. And so we do that at, hello Emma. Everyone, this is Emma from Genstock. Genstock is our AI technician company, and they've been absolutely fabulous as well. So she's also a thank you, and Nelpa Armstrong has been our AI technician the whole way along. So the love and care that they give our youth at that point has been fabulous too. So now that I've embarrassed you, you can go upstairs.
Thanks, Isabel.
So no, what I was saying is that we mark out the different sires on the lambs as they're going along. So when we're doing all the weights and things, we can actually visually see how particular sires are going to. And while we don't pull them apart into sire groups until the open day, when you're weighing them, you just can't help but go, wow, that looks pretty good. Who's the blue back sire? So anyone who's got a ram in at any point, you're all very welcome to come and look at the lambs at any time, and I would highly recommend to do it on a weighing day because then you've got 500 lambs running through the scales literally one at a time, and you can get an amazing handle in terms of how the different sire lines are working. So I mentioned we have an open day for 2025. That's going to be on Friday the 29th of August. We've previously always had it in the middle of September, and that's caused difficulties for people from a ram selling point of view. So we've pulled it forward 2 weeks this year to the end of August, which means that the lambs will be about 15 or 16 weeks old. Everybody's welcome to that. That's open to the public to come. We run it such that the sire contributors get to come first thing in the morning and have a look at their lambs before the public see them. And that's really great from a classing point of view, enabling you to kind of walk from pen to pen, looking at the different sire lines, seeing how yours compare, and you kind of walk around the yards 2 or 3 times and you get a really good feel in terms of what's going on. The value in that is, I don't actually think that I can explain the value of the open day in words, because you literally see your lambs in their sire groups. You can see conformation, you can see muscularity, you can look for particular breed types if you're a stud producer. You have a data sheet that tells you how the performance of those animals have gone. And so, in effect, it is your genetics in action that day. And so the lambs, there is variation between the different sires, and it becomes very apparent very quickly what particular sire lines are throwing. So if anybody is available the 29th of August and they find this interesting, I would highly recommend come up and have a look at the lambs. Okay, so if we start looking at what we've actually done to this point. So for the last 5 years, we have had 2,933 lambs born. I've just put a little bit of a summary sheet now. That's in your paperwork there, so I'm not going to go through this. Other than to say, within years we have variation of conception. So as you can see, early on our lambing percentage was incredibly high. So we had a lot of twins and triplets and quads. And while I know Jim's here and he's part of Regulin, we stopped using Regulin after that because what we ended up finding, great from a commercial point of view, more lambs are better, but from a research point of view, triplets and quads are actually pretty useless. They're so impacted by the environment, both gestation as well as on farm, that the reporting that you get out of them is you can't pull it back into the genetics. The environment's just so heavily impacted on it. So we want singles. As again, terrible for productivity, but from a testing point of view, it's ideal to get lambs that are reared that are gestated as singles and born as singles. So we've ended up with a lambing percentage of 157%, which is we're pretty happy with that. So ideally, I think about 140% for a research flock is about right, so that the testing is appropriate. So always everyone wants to know how you get a ram in. So we put a nomination out to all the Poll Dorset stud breeders the middle of September, asking for them to nominate a ram that they would like to have benchmarked, that they would like to have tested. And then the list of sires come in, and then we sit down and actually work through a selection criteria. So really important to us is that we get a variation in the genetics that we're testing, because in effect we're not trying to test whether they grew fast on the grass as a year. We're trying to actually measure them within the year as well. So we want variation in the genetics so that those differences can come forward. We want a variation in the depth of performance testing, and I will come back to that. We want variation in visual style, and that is because for people who are breeding lambs, for the most part, the assessments that you do are with your eyes. You can put them over the scales, you can put them on a set of hooks, but first and foremost, you've looked at your lambs running around in the paddock. And so if you can understand how visual differences actually can impact performance differences, particularly carcass performance differences, we can then kind of learn and understand what the best visual style of animal is for the outcome that we're trying to achieve. In addition to that, of course, you've got variation inside the Poll Dorset breed, and so some areas of Australia need rams of a different style to others too. So it's really great just to have differences. We try and pick animals if they've been upheld as high quality in any one area, so that's show champions. So if a ram's won a royal, if someone independent has decided that is actually the best ram at that particular fight, we want to try and include them if we can. And in the same vein, we also want to include animals that have performed incredibly well on their ASBVs, so from a performance recording point of view. That can be on a single trait, or it could also be across multiple traits as well. We have tested animals that are historical sires. So this year we've got a 2015 ram going through, and I have been asked why on earth we've got such an old ram. There's a few reasons. The impact that ram was able to have when his progeny were all born was quite significant. He also has grand progeny and great-grand progeny, but he's never had any carcass testing done on him. And so the impact that we know about for the performance testing that's been done this far has been valuable. But let's actually also have a look at the carcass information as well. And so he may be more valuable or he might be less valuable, we just don't know. So let's find out. And the final ones, which are more of about kind of trying to be really inclusive, is if a stud puts a ram forward, we want to try and accept one of those nominations. And that's because that stud has shown a willingness to learn. And that willingness to learn is actually a really, really important part of the program that we run. And so if we can, we will put... Is that your phone, Ruth? So if we can, we'll always put one in from each stud. It doesn't always work, but we try to. And probably more importantly, if we've got a first-time entrant, we really, really try and include that ram, because it can be a big step forward actually nominating your genetics into a public progeny trial, because the risk is that, what if they don't do very well, right? And people, not everybody wants to kind of publicly display what's going on. And so we've always been very encouraging of anyone who puts their hand up and says, yeah, we'll pop a ram in. So, and the last one is if they've been used across multiple studs, and so the testing that we do can actually impact a significant number of breeding programs. So that's a really important one as well. So these nominations come in, get all the information together, and then Ash White, who's actually in the room, has been our independent selection person for the last 5 years. Ash and I have a very, very long conversation. Ruth gets the list. She, without any sort of input, she works her way through it. I work my way through mine. Ash works his way through. We have a big long chat, and eventually we come up with about 15 rams. And that can be... It goes to and from a little bit. But for the most part, I think we've been really happy with the rams that we've put through, and certainly from a cohort point of view, we've had enough variation to actually, a variation in the genetics and the trait capacity to actually show significant differences as well. So far so good. Anyone got any questions about that? Yep.
Isabelle, how many rams roughly get nominated?
Oh, this year we had 29 and 14 got accepted this year. So at Ridgehaven we take ram positions if we got one that we want to test as well. So normally we'll put one through. A couple of years ago we put 3 through because we had new sire lines that we brought in. So we've always had more nominations than positions available. So if I talk a little bit more about the percentage of performance measurement and why that's a really important trait for us to look at in terms of selecting the rams. So some of you would be aware that within the Poll Dorset breed there's a significant amount of the genetic population that hasn't done a huge amount of performance testing. Now, probably I would say in the last 5 years that has increased exponentially, but prior to that there was a great big population that basically had nothing tested on them. And when I say performance testing, like birth weights, growth rates, scanning data was kept in-house, nothing was compared outside of the farm. Literally no carcass testing unless they'd been through a reference population, and there wasn't a huge amount of that. And so there was an enormous question about the untested population and what qualities that we had inside of that we just actually had no idea about. And so the exploration of those untested genetics was really, really important to us. And so if we look at the snapshot of the ram, so we've tested 73 over the last 5 years. If you look at a snapshot of the performance measurement of those 73 rams, there's only 14 out of 73 that we would class as having high levels of performance testing. So in effect, the ASBVs that come out from that should be accurate, and you should get a good flow through of performance from sire through to progeny. So we were talking 14 out of 73, so it's only 20% are sitting at a high level. Now, my classification of a high level sits in and around whether the animal's been tested, whether their progeny's been tested, whether there's genomics, whether there's linkages to other flocks. So it's a little bit of a subjective thing, that high to low, but when we think about 20% only high, and 13 out of 73 had none, and 20 out of 73 had very low, there's a big question about the capacity of the genetics of the Poll Dorset breed that we just currently don't know anything about. And so that's been absolutely fantastic for us to be able to invite other stud breeders in to get their animals tested in a benchmarking scenario, so that the accuracy of the information is literally 0 to 100. Whereas if they were trying to do it themselves, it's going to take them years and generations to actually get there too. So the more progeny trial work that we can do inside the Poll Dorset breed now, the much faster rate of gain that we're going to get in our genetics going forward too. So that's been really, really important. Okay, so that's basically where we've got to at this point from the sheep that have been involved. Obviously we need to feed them, so genetics are one thing. Nutrition and management is critically important. If you're a lamb producer, you actually know that that's more important for the outcome that you can achieve. For us, running a progeny trial, making sure that the nutrition and the management was very well planned, and also that we can try and actually get year-on-year analysis work to be able to get done by actually knowing what that nutrition and management's been and not changing that too much. So these sheep get loved and adored a little bit. Pete. The other Pete, not my Pete. He just laughed because he knows what the outcome of them is. So what I'm going to say is they don't go short of feed, but they do express their genetic potential. And that's the most important thing. If we ran them short of feed, or if we didn't look after their animal health, we wouldn't actually know whether the information that we were gathering at the other end was due to the fact that they had poor genetics or if they didn't get fed. So they have to be loved and adored. When our grazing program gets put forward, the Bowan Park ewes go first, and everything else goes second in terms of our grazing rotations. So this is a snapshot of the last 5 years in terms of our seasonality. 2020 literally was as good as it gets. If I could have 2020 every year, I would probably be a pretty good farmer. 21 was a pretty good season. 22 was wet and it was grey, and our spring didn't. So our spring normally breaks around about the 10th of August. It didn't break until the end of August. So we had we had sheep that just looked really unhappy until the sun came out, basically. So we had a lag in growth from a seasonality point of view. They did bounce out of that, but there was definitely a lag of growth. 23 was I would class as an average season. We didn't have an abundance of feed everywhere, but it was definitely adequate. There was no problem, and the Bowan Park sheep had plenty. And 2024, we had a tight start. So coming into lambing, we were a little bit concerned, but then it started raining and then we were fine for the rest of that. So if you have a look at our carrying capacity numbers here, which is our DSCs per hectare. Now this is for the paddocks, for the days that they were being grazed. So this is not across the whole entire farm. This is not including paddocks when they've just left it. So while they were grazing, this is the stocking rate that we're running. So they're at a pretty high rate, but they are on until, 1,000 to 1,200 kilos is about where they get pulled out in terms of feed remaining, and then they move on to the next one. So there's always feed available ahead of them, and there's always quality feed available. And again, that's just so that they can express their genetic potential. The days in here, this is from days from marking, which is at 4 weeks of age, through to day of slaughter. So it's a really short time on farm, and so if we get it wrong, we don't have much time to recover out of it. So, which is why 22 was looking challenging, because it wasn't that there wasn't a quantity of feed, it was just that the sun didn't shine and the grass didn't have enough substance to it. So, has anyone got any questions up to this point?
What's the lambing date, Isabel?
Oh, so lambing date is 1st of May through to 10th of May, and then we do lamb backup lambs up to 30 days after the first lamb's born. So effectively we sit in two management groups, one which is the AI group and the others are the backups, but they're within a 30-day period. Yep.
So what have the results told you about the relevance of the show industry as a sire assessment?
Oh, curly one early.
Do you want to write that one on board?
No, look, I'll answer it now. I'll answer it now simply because I have spoken about sire selection. What I will say is that you don't, if it's an untested population, you will get a variety of results at the other end. And so some of those show animals have actually, from a performance point of view, performed as well as something that's had performance testing in it before, and others are not. And so if it literally is an untested population, of course, when you look at the distribution of the information, you're going to have some that are poor and some that are good, and then a whole lot that's in the middle. So the show industry itself's got nothing to do with these commercial traits, because we're not measuring how animals have performed in that way when you get into show ring. You're looking at them on one day, at one point in their life, and it's a different scenario. Yep.
Do you have a link ran between a link side between the different years?
Yes, I'm sorry I didn't mention that. So we link out to the reference population, so the information, the nucleus block. That's really important to us, but we also put a link ram in between years. So particularly for the 21-22, that was actually critically important so that we could see how the same genetics are performed in two different years and under two different nutritional situations. We also use the same backup rams from one year to the next to some extent. And so our backup lambs have got really good linkages between years too, because we can't put lots of link sires in on the AI, because otherwise we can't put enough sires in to test. So we pick one really strong link, make sure that's in. The last 2 years we've actually put 2 strong links in for the AI program, and that was under the guidance of the MLA satellite flock. They wanted us to put an extra one in, so that was fine. But yeah, super important. And it's actually super important from everybody's flocks to make sure that they've got linkages to each other. And so if you're picking a ram and he's been through Bowan Park, you've not only got linkages to our flock, but you've got linkages to all of the other flocks that those rams come from too.
Just as people ask questions, for the benefit of everyone in the room, could you please just give us your first name and whether you're from the stud industry or an agent or a producer or whatever. Just for the benefit of everyone, we'll know who's asking questions. Thanks, Isabel.
All right, I better keep going. I want to talk, so I might have to get told to.
No, you're right.
Righto. Okay, so the whole point of this is to benchmark performance, and so we're looking at outcomes when we're benchmarking our performance rather than just individual traits, because individual traits can describe an outcome, whereas a standalone thing, one trait actually doesn't necessarily provide you with one thing. So in the lamb industry, there's 4 key things that we need to achieve profitability in the systems that we run. First one's lamb survival. If it doesn't survive, it's just good fertiliser. Second one's growth. Third one is carcass weight and dressing percentage, particularly on that. And the fourth one, which is in industry and more likely to be increasing in industry, is looking at eating quality as a profitability driver as well. So they're the 4 outcomes that we are trying to find when we do our testing. So we'll start with lamb survival because, as I said, that's actually the most important one. So why measure lamb survival? If we have a ewe and we've joined her and she's run along and she's been preg tested and she's got lambs inside, she's already been a burden to our business from a cost point of view. If our lambs don't survive, she has no capacity to provide us with the income at the other end. So lamb survival is absolutely critical. So the question in around lamb survival is, what are the traits that actually impact that lamb survival and what can we measure? Because in our project it's all about what you can measure rather than what you think might be a nice idea. So we can measure the survival outcome. If it was it born dead? Was it born live? If it was born live, did it die? Effectively, they're the three metrics that we're looking at. We want to look at lambing ease. So lambing ease can indicate a significant efficiency inside your management. It can also achieve a significant ewe health outcome at the other end. If you've got a lot of ewes that need assistance, you'll have a pretty good chance of having some unhealthy ones. And we can also measure birth weight. So there are 3 metrics that we look at to try and boil it down to a lamb survival outcome. So across our almost 3,000 lambs, we've had 92.5% live lambs after 3 days. So that might sound... Can I just segue this into, if you ever want your management and your ability to look after sheep put on public, this is it. So we've had a few challenges inside our twins and our triplets and our quads from a lamb survival point of view, but that's not the only thing. So 92% for us, while we would like that to be a lot higher, it is quite simply what has happened, and there's been quite a few reasons why that has happened. And for the most part, while we accept that management is a big part of that, there has been some genetic reasons why that's happened too. So if we look at the survival category as live, stillborn, which is literally a lamb that has not walked. So look at the foot and see whether it's actually got up or not. Accident, illness, misadventure, that basically covers what it says, including mismothering. So if a lamb has got through the fence and just got away from the sheep, which they do. If they died during birth, and we're going to have a bit more of a look at that, if they died due to predation, which is foxes, and if they died prenatal, which is all of those little ones that are born prior to 7 days before their due date. So lamb, effectively, that is a very late miscarriage. So if we look at stillborn and birth, because in reality, those are the ones that potentially are going to be more impacted by genetics than anything else. So stillborn and birth, we had 104 lambs inside our almost 3,000 lambs that fit in that category. 8 were born breech, 16 were due to dystocia, 19 failed to thrive, and I'll come back to that one, and 6 were malpresentation, and 55 were stillborn. So we had quite a number of lambs where the ewe had a set of twins. The first one popped out fine, the second one did not. And it had certainly died inside, not when it had come out, because we were there at lambing and we saw that. So one particular year, and Greg Sawyer, who's here, who was doing a PhD, he actually helped us with this lamb survival question, and they sent quite a number of these lambs to the pathology lab and did some autopsies on them. So those stillborn lambs, some of them there was an unknown to. But we found out that we had a slight iodine deficiency, which I don't know, the vets in the room can probably help out in terms of what that is. But the iodine deficiency, if you're finding that you're having lambs that are just born for no apparent reason, or born failing to thrive and then within 24 hours, no good, iodine actually impacts hugely in terms of your the lethargy level of a lamb when it's born and during the birthing process. And so we resolve this by now, rather than just giving them plain salt throughout the year and then like a mineral leak during pregnancy and lactation, we give them iodised salt. So literally like what goes on your kitchen table. And since then, our rates of death are basically zero. So it's if that's an issue that you've had on farm, it's definitely worth having a look at what your soil type is and whether there's actually enough iodine in the soil to come through. They weren't all that, but that was definitely a portion. And as soon as we started managing the sheep differently from iodine, we diminished that number quite quickly. So breech lambs are breech for a number of reasons. You don't always know that they've come out breech. There's a few livestock consultants and vets in the room that possibly could help and decide whether it's a reason or not. But a breech lamb, of course, is going to be much riskier at birth than what a lamb that can come out head first is. So you're going to lose a few there. Dystocia, 16 out of almost 3,000 lambs. So we would class Dystocia obviously as a lamb that's born live, but we haven't had to pull it, but it's got a big fat head. That's a Dystocia lamb. So that might be a live Dystocia lamb, obviously rather than a dead one. But if we find a lamb down the paddock that's got a big fat head, we didn't have to assist it, but clearly it got stuck. That sits inside that space. So 16 out of 3,000 on a trial scenario where we don't know anything about the genetics is pretty low. That's not really a huge amount of significance on its own level, unless we start looking at some of the other survival metrics alongside of that and find out that there's a genetic reason for it. Failed to thrive. Now, failed to thrive, and I wish, if Gordon Refshaughey was here, he would probably tell me about failed to thrive is actually a Dystocia issue as much as anything else. And that's actually what we found too. So with the autopsies with the lambs that we had that failed to thrive, there was a significant amount of bleeding in the back of the brain, which indicates that during the birthing process, there's been too much compression down through that area, which has caused effectively brain damage on those lambs. And so a lamb that fails to thrive in the first, particularly 12 hours of its life, is quite likely to have been impacted from a Dystocia point of view. So that's also something that's interesting, because it doesn't have a big fat head, it doesn't look like there's been any dramas, but there's a potential that it's actually due to the birthing process, not something else. So when we look at our survival outcomes, what inside of that can we attribute to genetics? I'm not answering that. We'll keep going, and I will get you an answer at the end. But just think about the fact that what we're looking for is genetic reasons, not management reasons or not nutritional reasons. Okay, so survival outcome. I've already mentioned that when it comes to multiples, you tend to have more issues than you do with singles and twins. A number of our triplets, we had issues where we had two big lambs, one small lamb, or even two big lambs and one that had failed to form completely. And so there was, I think we often have a set of triplets and two get born, where's the third one? Sometimes that third lamb doesn't actually get the nutrition it needs in utero. And so we knew that because we were lambing all the triplets by one sheep in a pen, and so we knew what was coming out of the sheep on that. But I think what's interesting that this indicates is that from a Dystocia point of view, you will get more in a single, but you do get some in a twin, and even in this instance we had some with triplets. From a malpresentation point of view, the twins are where we got the most issues, and that was really two heads coming at once, or one lamb forward, one lamb back. And the triplets, if I recall rightly, that was like three lambs trying to come at the same time. That was a nice little drama. So birth multiple is a big reason for the survival outcome as much as what nutrition and management or genetics would be. We go back to survival outcomes. Has anyone got anything that they want to ask or contribute to survival outcomes? Yep.
Did you relate this to the condition score that you and lambing at all? Like, you know, did you see a tendency for over-conditioned use in lamb?
No. We didn't relate it, is what I said. So that's not a no that there was no, but we did not relate that. So we didn't condition score the ewes every year. So in terms of being able to present some information, I can't.
Another question, Isabel?
On that condition score, like generally, what is your condition score at then?
It depends on the year a little bit.
But you said you really look after the ewes, so...
Oh yeah, so we want to lamb them at condition score 3 to 4 if we can, but some of them will sit in 5. Very few of them will be under 3, because running into lambing, if we want to manage them well into lambing so that we're not blowing up birth weights more than anything else. And so if you get to, if you get to a point where your ewes are actually starting to decline and then you've got to feed them to try and keep them up there, the risk is that you're going to blow up a birth weight inside. So we're trying to make sure that that birth weight measurement can be as accurate as we need it to be. So so ideally 3 to 4, but Dorset ewes, some of them eat a bit more and they get 5.
Phil?
So what percentage of your multiples are triplets?
All the way back somewhere. There we go. How good is your maths?
Pretty good, actually.
Yeah, so 917 over, that's about 25%. That's about about 25%. 6, that's a bit over half for the twins. So probably about 55% for...
No, twins, triplets. Not singles or twins, triplets.
Oh, okay. Well, so if we had a bit over 50% of our lambs were twins, and then...
About 6, yeah, right.
Yeah. Yep. But as I said, in these early years where we were using Regulin, it was just, it kind of blew out. So
Just that fact, you just go to about 29 twins and 17 triplets, and it's like, oh, the twins are doing worse than the triplets.
no, they're definitely not. All right. Good point though. A few percentages wouldn't go astray. All right. I'll find my other slide. Yep. Okay. So lambing ease. So from a stud point of view, we try and measure every lambing scenario because we know that lamb survival is really, really important. We also know that the management of commercial lambing needs to be as hands-off as you can make it. And so if we can measure what lambing ease occurs inside our stud program, and so we can, and we do genetically attribute lambing ease, even though I know a significant amount of it can be management, but if all the ewes have been managed under the same conditions and a portion of them need assistance, then there's got to be something genetic about that. That's our reckoning. So lambing ease is scored 1 for no assistance, 2 for an easy pull, 3 for a hard pull, 4 for a male presentation, and 5 for a surgical intervention. And we did. I'm going to have to tell this story. Where's Stace? Yep. So we had one ewe that had significant scarring around her vagina. So all the vets in the room need to close their ears. So we had to give her an episiotomy to get the lamb out. She was totally fine. We sorted it out and she ran her lamb. Probably shouldn't do such amateur vet work, but anyway, we did. Okay, so if we go 1, 2 and 3 are the ones that we really start looking at from a genetic, what can we do genetically to make sure that we don't have 2s and 3s. We want lambs all to just pop out by themselves. We do not want to have to pull them, and we certainly do not want to have hard pulls because that's where we start getting more ewe deaths. So almost 96% of the lambs that have been born, including all of those multiples, have lambed all by themselves. We've had 3.2% that have been easy pulls, and we've had 0.1% which has been a hard pull. Those lambing ease scores, so we're probably going to be spending a little bit more time with these lambs than most people, and for us lamb survival outcome is actually more important than whether we choose to pull or not. But Stace and Ruth and I have managed these for the same for the last 5 years with the outcome that we want a live lamb, and if it gets a lambing ease score of 2 or 3, that's what it has to have. If we think it needs intervention, we will intervene to make sure that we've got a live lamb at the other end. Rarely do we have to, but we will do that, probably more than what some other studs may, because our lambs, every lamb is incredibly valuable. Okay, so anyone else in the room do lambing ease scores? Yep. So how do you guys handle... I'll go this way first. So how do you handle lambs that are born that have got a big fat head? Do you give them 1s or 2s? You give them 2s? Yep, so looking at Rod, what do you give them? 2s? What do you guys give them? So you haven't had to provide it with assistance, but when you find the lamb, you can see visually that there has been difficulty during lambing. How would you score that? A 2 or a 3? Yep. So yep.
I give it a 4.
You give it a 4.
Something's been wrong like that.
Yeah, okay. So this is the one area where there is a little bit of personal flexibility. We give them 2s because they're the lamb that we think if we had gone around the paddock at that particular time, we'd go, probably need to pull that one out. So any of those lambs are included in that lambing ease score 2 as well. So if we think about the traits that we've measured so far, we've measured whether the lamb was survived or not. We've measured whether the lamb required any sort of assistance. And then the other one that we measure is the birth weight. So birth weight's really important. We need to know what level of weight will provide us with the optimal lamb survival outcome. And so if we look at the yearly averages on these, because I haven't put birth multiples up there, that actually doesn't make a huge amount of sense in terms of a comparison. But what it gives you a snapshot of is that the averages inside of that space are different per year, and that can be a genetic thing or it could be a management thing. Birth weight by multiple, singles, twins, triplets, quads, they are obviously significantly different one to another. That is what you would expect, but just kind of keep those in mind when we're thinking about how heavy do you want your lambs to get and what's risky in terms of a lamb being too heavy. So the birth weight across the whole 5 years of cohort went from, I think the lowest was about 1.2 and the highest was about 7.8. He was almost ready to weep. But the majority of them sit between 3.5 and 6.5 kilos, and probably I could pull that in between 4 and 6 kilos. When we have a look at birth weight and survival outcome, which is really the purpose of actually measuring your birth weight, is to see whether there's a different survival outcome when it comes to weight. The interesting thing, and now this graph looks at 100% of the lambs that were born in this particular weight range, rather than every weight range having the same number of lambs. So if you look at it as a percentage, it kind of makes a bit more sense because lambs of a certain weight may survive differently to another one. So when we're looking at 0 to 3 kilo lambs, we've got around about a 75% lamb survival rate, whereas when we're looking between 5 and 5.5, we're sitting up around that 95%. So birth weight in this instance actually makes a significant difference to the survival outcome. I think the interesting thing is that once we get over to the other end, and this is obviously the area that we focus on because oversized lambs cause management issues as well, and overfed your sheep and you get oversized lambs. But the percentage of lambs that sat in this 6 to 7.5 kilo, the survival rate of those lambs is not significantly different to the midpoint. So I think it's worthwhile thinking about birth weight from a lamb survival outcome as a 2 standalone traits, but we need to overlay that with lambing ease as well, because we've got a management issue that we need to deal with. And if we don't have, if we have issues with ewe losses, or if we have to put more labour on to actually get our lambs alive, that's a whole other production issue that we work with. So if we think about what we want to achieve is 100% lamb survival with no intervention, that's effectively what we're trying to find. So if we put birth weight over lambing ease, the graph turns the other way up. So these little ones don't need help, but the big ones do. And so if we go backwards, birth weight impacts lamb survival more, but high birth weight impacts lambing ease more. So the best thing that we can do is actually throw the two of those together on a graph and actually try and find the midpoint. So if we're looking for lambs that survive and don't need assistance, in our particular trial set, what we found is 3.5 kilos to 6 kilos is ideal. And that's a really nice big spread. Like, you don't, there's all sorts of management and climatic conditions that those lambs can withstand across Australia. So 3.5 to 6 kilos is ideal. 3 to 3.5 was okay, but you will need to manage your sheep more appropriately. So I'm thinking from an exposure point of view, little lambs, if it's really cold, are more likely to die. And the ones between 6 and 6.5, they will be fine, but you need to manage your ewe condition much better and make sure you don't blow up your lambs in that last period of gestation. So 3 to 6.5 is the range, but bring it in a little bit more if you're looking for more of an ideal, or if you feel like you're possibly not quite as good at managing your ewe population during that late stage gestation. So what does that look like on an ASBV? Because at the end of the day, I can give you all these numbers, but the lambs that are born on my farm are impacted by my management. Whereas when we start looking at ASBVs, you can pick and choose what fits your purpose, and they should be able to fit for most farms around about the place. So this range, the ideal is between 0.29 and 0.52. That's your ideal birth weight ASBV. And again, that is a huge range. And when you're looking for genetics, you can then, there's a good range inside birth weight that you can then look at all your other traits alongside of knowing that your birth weights actually should be fine. So that's the ideal. The range is 0 to 6.8, but get up to a 6.8, you really have to make sure you manage your sheep well at the end of the day. But there's a bit of a trade-off. We all know that a higher birth weight lamb will be a higher growth lamb, and so we do need to trade off the difference between birth weights and growth. And so if you're a person who knows how to manage your ewe population and you're happy to take the risk that you might have to pull a few lambs, your higher birth weight might end up giving you higher growth rates too. So just keep those numbers in mind, 0.29 to 0.5 to 0.52. If you want the best survival outcome, the least amount of intervention required, that's what we have found will actually give you that. Any questions on that? Yep.
How are you differing? Did you say you have got the triplets in a single pen? Is that just the ewe or a group of triplets?
So we'll so all the ewes run together up until 10 days prior to lambing, and at that point the singles and the twins so they get moved out into their lambing paddocks, and the triplets get put into smaller paddocks as well, because often our triplets are the ones that have got the shortest gestation, and we need to just make sure that they're okay. When I say they're in single pens, might be a group of 4 or 5 ewes in a 100 metre square containment pen. So they're not locked in a pen, but they are separated so that we don't get mismothering. If 4 or 5 sheep have lambs in the middle of the night and you arrive with 15 lambs, it's a bit of management required there. Other questions?
I'd just like to say, Isabelle, on the birth weight figures you just put up there, that with the accuracy we've got, 0.52, a ram's quoted 0.52, quite often not 0.52 for birth weight. And when I was working up the road, we used to work on 0.4 because if the accuracies weren't right, the 0.4 ram was 0.52, but a 0.52 ram can actually be 0.6, and all of a sudden we're in that grey area of don't want to go there.
I completely agree with you on that. So the range that I've put up there is the ASBV for those particular lambs. So we're not talking about sire ASBVs. So the lambs that achieve those particular birth weights, that was the range of their... So they're quite accurate because they've been weighed, their siblings have been weighed, they've all been done on the same farm. But I completely agree. Accuracy inside an ASBV is most important to look at before you even start looking at the actual number itself.
Isabelle, have you done anything with gestation length?
I knew I was going to get this question. So the answer is yes, but from a commercial point of view, because I'm not presenting that today, because from a commercial point of view, it's not a profitability driver. And we try and really concentrate on the traits that actually give our lamb producers the best bang for their buck. What I will say is gestation length, for every day that your lamb is overdue, you get an extra 250 grams of lamb. So a lamb that's 4 days overdue will be a kilo heavier. So if you're wanting to measure birth weights and being really accurate with your birth weight, you have to know what the gestation length is, because the impact of that is enormous. All right. keep going. Okay, so our lamb's come out, he's survived. We now know what the ASBV needs to look like to make that happen. So into the bit that actually gets a bit interesting, because the lamb's on the ground and he starts to grow. So why measure growth? How does growth impact lamb production system efficiency and effectiveness and ultimately profitability? And that's the big question, and it's also the easy question, because growth is your biggest profit driver, hands down, after lamb survival. But once you've got that sorted out, growth is your biggest profit driver. And it doesn't matter what system you sell your lambs under. If you produce lambs, you can drive, and your lambs grow faster, you will drive your profitability, full stop. So we measure lambs at 4 weeks of age, which is that lamb marking, and we start looking at the growth measurements from that point, because prior to that there's a huge maternal impact on how fast that lamb has grown. So 4 weeks to 19 weeks, or 4 weeks to 17 weeks is our real measurement growth period. So 4 weeks, 10 weeks, 14 weeks and 17 weeks, and then there's a 19-week pre-slaughter weight. We take 4 measurement points because in this system we're really looking to see how the genetics are working both at that early stage growth but also the later stage growth. And I know 17 weeks probably doesn't sound like later stage growth, but it's all we've got to work with because the lambs go at 19. So growth rates, if we're looking at average weight per multiple, I always think this is an interesting graph because we always have singles and twins and triplets running around on the farm, and it's always curious to know what the capacity of that multiple could be. So look at your 19-week, we start at, well, birth weight, we started at 5.8, 4.9 and 4.2, and at 19 weeks we ended up at 57, 50 and 47. So curiously the triplets weren't too far behind the twins. But a 7 kilo difference on a single versus a twin might sound great, but remember you've got 2 twins. So you've either got 57 kilos of a single or you've got 100 kilos of twins. So if I'm going to advocate for birth multiples, twins every day of the week.
Is that born as or raised as?
So that is raised as.
Okay.
Yeah, that one's raised as. So that's a good question. So the way that we've looked at the data is gestation, single, twin, triplet, quad, but also raised single, twin, triplet, quad too. So when I speak later about singles, which are really the numbers that we can nut out, their lambs are gestated as singles and raised as singles as well. Yep, so twins are the go. Okay, so if we have a look, this, you're not meant to know what the sire numbers are or what's what, but I just popped this graph up just so that we can have a look at the variation that can occur in a 4-week period of time. So, you know, probably this lamb is pretty exceptional. 32 kilos at a 4-week weight. I wouldn't want to be the person picking up for lamb marking. But if you look at there is variation within the sires, and that's not necessarily reflective of the birth weight. This is truly reflective of rearing capacity of the ewe, as well as the growth capacity of the lamb, and from a genetic point of view from the ewe and the ram. All right, so average weights, if we're looking from birth to 17 weeks across the 5 years. So I thought this was important to actually have a look at the difference that we had in the years, but probably more importantly, just to actually start to get an idea of what the growth curve looks like. There is variation. Again, you're not meant to know that these are what rams these particularly are. It's just if you can recognise that most of them follow a similar growth curve, but there is variation within that, it means that genetically, if we've done the right thing management, genetically we've got different sheep. Singles. So this is weight per sire for the 4 to 10 weeks of age. There is actually significant impact of sire genetics in this growth phase particularly. What we found is that there's a portion that grow slower early. Actually, when we get to the 10 to 14, it shows a bit more. But they grow slower early and fast later. And then there's the other side of the population which grow fast early and slower later. So they mature earlier. And this has actually been a really great thing to be able to see on farm. They come through a lamb marking and go, wow, look at these, this sire's doing an amazing job. By the time you get to 14 weeks, there's a whole lot of other sires that have actually gone past. So what that allows us to understand is that all growth genetics are not the same. Some will grow fast early, some will grow fast late. and identifying that to fit your lamb production system is actually really important to be able to. So weaning weight and post-weaning weight ASBVs actually will indicate that for you. And a lot of the information that we've got actually can really help the accuracies of the difference between weaning weight and post-weaning weight ASBVs. Average size, so 10 to 17 weeks. So this is just the other half of the graph. So we have rams up here. That one there, he was about a midpoint. So this is exactly what I'm describing, is that they're slower earlier and then they speed up at the end. Alternatively, you've got ones that were following the same trajectory that have actually slowed off too. So there's difference. Growth for all the cohort lambs. So when I describe cohort lambs, they're the AI lambs, and when I say backup lambs, they're the backup lambs. And we do differentiate these when we're looking at growth numbers, because the cohort lambs are born within 10 days of each other, and the backup lambs are the 20 days following that. And so the 14-week weight is done on the same day for all lambs, but some of them are 14 weeks and some of them are only 12 weeks. And so from looking at a growth comparison, we're actually looking at a different stage. So we're only going to look at cohort lambs. So if we look at kilos lambs weaned, which I'm hoping Ellie tells me is a good metric to propose in terms of whether you've actually achieved some sort of efficiency on your farm. So we're looking at kilos of lambs weaned. We're also looking at average kilos per head. And I had intended on putting our percentage on that, and I just missed doing that. So we're looking at 14 weeks of age across 1,700 odd lambs, 41 kilos average lamb weaned. So how does that fit with people's expectations of what you should be able to wean your lamb at? Okay? So 71 tonnes of lamb at 14 weeks, that was pretty good. I thought our on-farm growth was all right for those 5 years. So then we have a look at days to marketable weight. So this is the other metric. So we need to wean a certain number of kilos, but we also want to make sure that those kilos are ready to go. And so can anyone tell me why days to marketable weight is such an important metric to look at as well? Right, I've got a slide at the end that hopefully will answer that one for you. But just keep that in mind. Days to marketable weight impacts a significant amount of the production capacity of your farm. So I just thought it'd be a bit fun to pull out and actually have a look at how many lambs in our single group were ready to get sold at 50 kilos to come out at a minimum of 25 kilos. So minimum 50 kilos, which means that there was a portion that were above that. Minimum of 25 kilos, because we know that these ones will dress out more than 50%, and when we could have started selling them. So we had one lamb, we could have sold him at 10 weeks of age, he was over 50 kilos. We had 25% of our lambs could have been sold at 14 weeks, over 50 kilos. We had almost 60% at 70 weeks, and by 19 weeks, 3/4 of the lambs would be off the farm and gone. And by that stage, if you were in a commercial scenario, this 25 would have already been sold. The extra, how's my maths? 35 would have already been sold. And so the percentage of these ones, because they had more grass to eat, probably would have been even higher. So days to marketable weight allows your stocking rate capacity of your farm to actually increase, because your lamb that you're producing, your production unit, is gone. And the grass that you grow can be spread over what's left. So days to marketable weight is actually a critically important thing for improving the stocking rate capacity of your farm. That's one benefit for it. Okay, so I mentioned before about birth weights. The most important thing is we get lamb survival, but we can get 100% lamb survival, but if they don't grow after that, then the productivity of what you do is actually significantly reduced as well. So I really thought it was important to actually have a look at the impact of birth weights on the growth rates as we went along, again to see if we can find that optimum birth weight for lamb survival, but match that up with an optimal growth rate at the other end as well. So this graph, excuse me, this graph's got two columns on it. The blue ones are the growth rates, so grams per day, between 4 to 10 weeks. The orange is grams per day between 10 and 17 weeks. And the line shows the average birth to 19-week daily weight gain. So for the lifetime of that lamb, what was the daily weight gain? Lambs that are born light, so below 3 kilos, never grow fast. That's in effect what our averages tell us. Now, averages, I know, is a kind of a loose data metric to use, but it's the best thing that we can use to describe what we've got in a really quick summary point of view. So lambs that are born light never grow fast. Lambs that are born heavy will always grow fast. But it does tip off, and I think this is an interesting point to look at, because when we were talking about lamb survival, somewhere over 6 to 6.5, and actually if I've got to put it in real numbers, 6.2 there was no problems, 6.8 we started having problems. They're our two numbers. So 6.2 to 6.8 kilo lamb is where you start getting issues. You want to try and avoid that. So these heavier lambs will give you effectively your best growth rate and your highest level of lamb survival. If you're wanting to push more into a lamb survival area, sit down in your medium range, because you're still going to get 320, 330 grams a day growth over his life, and that's still an effective growth rate. But if you really want to push your growth rate and you're prepared to manage your ewes a little bit differently at lambing, in terms of maybe needing to give a bit of assistance, then you can sit up around about 370 or 380 grams a day, and that's a significant impact in terms of your selling of your lambs too. So just keep in mind that low birth weight does not equal high growth rate for the most part. There are curve benders that can do that, but from an average point of view, if you have a low birth weight lamb, you are not going to get a high growth, and if you have a high birth weight lamb, you are going to get a high growth, but it does tail off. So that's probably an area to actively avoid. This is an area to work in if you're happy to manage it well, and then the medium range, which is 4 to 6 kilos, is really your happy medium, where you can get efficiency of your management and on-farm systems too. Anyone got any questions on that one? No? Okay, so talking about curve benders. So we're looking at some sire ASBVs here, and I'm just going to assume that everybody uses ASBVs, and if you don't, just come and talk to me later about what this actually means. The impact of using ASBVs is simply that you can understand genetics from all sorts of environments and all sorts of different populations, and potentially use those genetic traits inside your system. So they're one of the tools for breeding. There's obviously a huge amount of other tools, and your eyes are very, very important, your knowledge is very important, but ASBVs are the things that can help describe data. So that's what we're talking about today. So if we're looking for curve benders really are things that act outside of the ordinary. So if we're talking about birth weight and growth, this is ordinary, where you have a low birth weight and a low growth, and a high birth weight and a high growth. That is ordinary, that is easy to find, that is going to happen a big amount of the time. Whereas if we're looking for curve benders, what we're looking for is low birth weights and high growth, which is much harder to do, and the only way to find it is doing lots of progeny testing and putting them into an analysis that can actually bring these forward. So I've picked 3 sires for no particular reason other than they're at the upper end of the growth rates for post-weaning. So 18 or 19 are definitely on the top end of most industry growths. Most rams that come along with a post-weaning of 19 will come along also with a birth weight that's higher than ideal. But we've got a couple inside our group where we've got a moderate birth weight, and this one's got a low birth weight, but we still end up with the same sort of, with the growth rates at the other end. So finding these genetics is actually one of the really critical parts of what we do, is actively looking for curve bending rams that potentially do a different job to what the standard ram may. All right, questions?
Done well.
All right.
Yeah, done all right. Yeah.
Any questions on that? Righto. Well,
Terry?
Yep.
Isabelle, do you think your feeding regimen was typical of the industry? Lambs and
No.
Two parts.
No, so the feeding regime that we have for our research use is different to our commercial ewes, and they're run on the same farm. So we would run our commercial crossbred ewes similar to what industry do, whereas because you're looking for efficiencies, so you're not going to actually provide them with the absolute best at all times, because your stocking rate on your farm actually you can't do that.
So do you think you prejudice your results by either overfeeding the ewes and potentially masking for converters who the ewes and or lambs, and even causing landing problems?
So feed conversion is basically what you're talking about in that.
And landing problems in the ewes by overfeeding?
I wouldn't say we overfeed the ewes prior to lambing, but we provide them with what they need to make sure that the genetics can be expressed post-lambing.
So you don't think you prejudice affected the results of any way?
I don't think so. And I say that because for the last 5 years we've basically managed them exactly the same, and if there was a significant prejudice, all the ASBBs would have come out and shown that what we were doing wasn't reflective of what industry was doing. So because we link through to the nucleus flock, and all of these rams are linked out into lots of other populations, our results haven't been significantly different to theirs. And then you put it through an analysis, and it actually should flatten out that as well. So yeah, we feed them better than probably what most people can, but we also want the genetics to be expressed.
Ashley?
Isabel, your birth weight to growth rate data, that is just across all lambs, isn't it? It's not corrected for singles and twins, it's just what you've observed in all the lambs?
Correct, that's all lambs.
Any other questions? We don't. Thank you.
I'll get off. I'm coming back later.
Yeah, no, that's fine. We'll break for morning tea, ladies and gentlemen.